What is up, everybody? Matt Parrino here from nyupinsyracuse.com. And the day we've all been waiting for a few months now is finally here, cut down day. And there's already been a couple of big moves and one shocking one for a big majority of Bills Mafia. We've been talking about LeSean McCoy's future over the course of the last few months throughout the offseason process when Brandon Beane added running backs through free agency, drafted a rookie in the third round in Devin Singletary. And today, that plan has come to fruition as the Buffalo Bills have released LeSean McCoy, cut him today ahead of the deadline to get down to 53 players. And it sent a little bit of a shockwave over social media. I think a lot of people expected LeSean McCoy, including myself, to still be on this roster. The Bills save a little bit over $6 million by cutting him and moving on. And I guess to start, my level of shock over this move is it's tempered a little bit. I think that, first off, I think that the Bills went out and got enough through free agency, and Devin Singletary has shown enough through training camp in the preseason to be counted on to be your starter. Listen, in this league, you want to take advantage of your young running backs. And when you add a guy like Frank Gore, who's 36 years old, to a backfield as one of the top two runners with the other guy in McCoy, who was 31, and I just think that goes against the trend of trying to take advantage of the skill set of these young running backs. And Devin Singletary has come out and shown that he has the ability to make plays. He's almost like a LeSean McCoy clone in a lot of ways. He was getting a lot of comparisons coming out of FAU to LeSean McCoy for his running style. And, a question that's popped up already from Arturo is Singletary the starter? And I think that definitely seems to be the expectation at this point among all, media reports and other things like that. Singletary has been getting first-team reps all the way back to minicamp. When you're talking about that surprised me. You want to talk about level of shock. That's where the shock started, because you go into the season and Brandon Beane was obviously talking about how much faith they still had in LeSean McCoy. He could still play. He's still the guy. And that's even McCoy said that's what he said. That he was told. So I think that Singletary, in my eyes, is the starter at this point. After that, it's going to probably be Frank Gore as that change of pace back. TJ Yeldon is your third down back. And then probably Sonoris Perry is going to be in the mix to still make this roster. We have about, I have it here, I wrote it down. We have about like 13 to 14 players, bubble players, that are still kind of in the mix as we move toward the 4 o'clock deadline. Brandon Beane is going to speak on a conference call at noon today. But I wanted to get in here and react to the LeSean McCoy news, because this is a pretty big deal. This is something that, going back to last season when we talked about the struggles that he was having, 514 yards, 3.2 yards per carry average last season was one of the worst numbers in the league. You had to think that the Bills had to do something to make a change. We go back and talk about his locker room presence and his ability as a leader. Brandon Beane went out and signed Frank Gore. And one of the first things that Sean McDermott said about Gore was the leadership that he brought into the locker room. Well, if you go out and get a guy like that to be a leader in your room, well, my thought process at the end of last season was that guy was already on the roster in LeSean McCoy. So if the Bills he was a captain last year. They talked about his leadership and bringing young guys along. And then you look towards the end of last season when the whole Keith Ford situation happened, when he was going to get some playing time late in the season, and McCoy scoffed at the idea that he'd have to give up carries to a young player like that. And then you start to question the leadership ability. So Frank Gore gets brought in. One of the first things that anybody says is, how much they've appreciated his leadership and what he's brought in that room. So I think the writing may have been on the wall. D asked, why didn't the Bills trade him? It's a great question. I think that there was no market for LeSean McCoy at about $8 to $9 million this year. He's still owed in the final year of his deal. He's going to be about a $6 million cap hit for any team that traded for him. And I think that's just a little bit too much, considering the downward trend that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, and some of the other things, the off the field concerns, that home invasion situation that still is kind of playing out in the court system that we've never really gotten clear answers on over the course of this whole process. The Bills said that they did their due diligence in the moment, but I think that the headaches that LeSean McCoy can bring, despite his elevated level of play, just from the headache he brings in the locker room, I think that teams see that, general managers see that, coaches see that. So I think that that's something that is the reason that he didn't get traded. Does Frank Gore even make the team? Rust asked. Yeah, I think Frank Gore is a lock. I think that he's going to be on this team. I think he's shown. The one thing I really like about Frank Gore is when he gets out on the field, you can pretty much guarantee that he's going to put his head down, go forward, and get you a couple yards. And at times last year, there was a lot of scenarios on first down that LeSean McCoy was out there getting you 1-2 yards, negative runs, and putting Josh Allen, your second-year quarterback, in a bad spot to start the game. So I think what Gore does is he provides that veteran leadership to a young guy like Devin Singletary. You kind of, take the restraints off him, let him run wild here as we get into the regular season and see what you got there. And I think a veteran like TJ Yeldon is a really, at the time it was the Bills drafted Devin Singletary a week or two later. But at the time, I think it was downplayed a little bit because McCoy was still on the roster. Yeldon's been a former second-round pick who's been at times a really, really good third-down running back. He's got versatility to his game. He can block out of the backfield. He can catch out of the backfield, and he's a good third-down running back option. So there's still some depth there. I think that what does it mean now? That's another question I wanted to answer before we get out of here. Brandon Beane, like I said, is going to speak at noon, so we'll have much more on this throughout the day. But I think what this means now is that Devin Singletary is the starter. The Bills obviously made some news with the reports out today that they've cut Duke Williams, the fan favorite wide receiver that I think a lot of folks were hoping was going to be kept on this roster. So we're looking at probably 6 wide receivers kept: Zay Jones, John Brown, Robert Foster, Cole Beasley, Andre Roberts, and I believe it will be Isaiah McKenzie will be that 6th wide receiver. He's a dynamic player. He can do a lot of things. So I think that, I know. David says mad about Duke. That was my anticipation. That a lot of fans were going to be mad about that because he does bring a different skill set. He's a bigger guy. He's a physical guy. And the Bills have a lot more small, compact, quick receivers on the roster right now. But I think that they're hoping to bring Duke Williams back on the practice squad as well as Ray McCloud, who was cut also. But in terms of the running back position, I think that you can go into the season with 4 running backs. Devin Singletary is your starter. TJ Yeldon, Perry, and Gore is kind of your depth there. And they're obviously going to bring Patrick DeMarco. Listen, we've been talking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks since camp started. Heath Farwell went out of his way to comment on Patrick DeMarco's experience as a special teams player, his leadership. He was a captain last year. I'd anticipate him being a captain once again this year. And so you got your 5 backs there. I think the disappointment comes that you had a guy like LeSean McCoy and you weren't able to get anything back for him. You're at this point just having to cut him, move on, hand the reins over to a young guy like Devin Singletary. And you would have liked to get something back in this situation. But it's also, I think, one of my biggest observations from the start of training camp all the way up until now, I mean, really go back to rookie minicamp, is the bonding and the closeness that this team has. And at times, I think LeSean McCoy's ego and attitude about how he approaches the game, even though he was saying all the right things, and he said it's interesting, I think it was telling, he said that Frank Gore had helped him realize that he needs to tune everything out and focus on the team, focus on the team goals throughout this part of the season. And for a 31-year-old, 10-year veteran of this game to need another veteran to kind of shine the light on that situation, I think maybe the writing should have been on the wall there. But no, I think that at this point you go into the season with a greater bond and you're moving past that old regime, LeSean McCoy is one of the last vestiges of the Rex Ryan era and the Doug Whaley era. And I think now you have, this rebuild now is completely complete here as we enter into year 3, which is a very important year for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. I think it's about winning now. It's about trying to figure out the best dynamic for your team. And this allows Josh Allen to really take the leadership role completely on this offense. Obviously, Frank Gore's still in the mix, but he's probably going to be more in a backup role. And there's not another voice in that locker room that could ever trump Josh Allen's at this point. Even in his second year, this is his team. It's going to be exciting to watch. First game right out the bat. Going to go against the New York Jets, who have made some improvements on their interior defensive line, drafted Quinnen Williams. They have a bunch of new players, and the Bills did well against the Jets last year. Remember, Matt Barkley came in, had himself a nice day, and then when Josh Allen played in the second game, it was a little bit more of a struggle, and they've obviously the expectations are heightened quite a bit for the Jets as well. So that first game is going to be fun to watch. It is 11:40 right now. Brandon Beane's talking about we'll talk on his conference call in about 20 minutes, and I will be back later today, probably around 4 or 5. Please come back and join me. We will react to all of the roster moves and the final shape that this 53-man roster takes. As always, thank you so much for joining me. And for all your Buffalo Bills content, keep it locked on the NY Up and Syracuse.com.